Welcome everybody to today's live stream. Excuse me. My name is Zipporah Kingsbury from ZipporahIntimacy.com, where I help high achieving adults to find sustainable inner peace and to learn the skills to gain more confidence and self-esteem in the realms of emotional intimacy and communication. Now, before I dive into our topic of the day and introduce our very, very special guest today, I want to take a moment and invite you over to my free Facebook group called Intimacy Hub. And in that group, I go live every week with special guests like today, as well as solo live trainings, all based on intimacy and relationship and interrelationship building skills and tools. So, without further ado, today, our special guest, I love it. This is very special to my heart, and you will all learn why in a moment. But I want to just introduce Rhonda Lopresti. I hope I always mess up names, so I hope that pronunciation was okay.
You did great.
Great. So she's a Tibetan Buddhist, an end-of-life coach, and home funeral guide, as well as the founder of Peacefully Prepared. Now, in a moment, I'm going to hand it over to her to share much more about what she does. But I just want to review a little bit because I put out, with the help of Rhonda, like tons of bullet points when it came to what we discuss in this call. I think I was just really excited. So I just want to review a little bit as viewers might come on, but just give you an idea of what might go into the conversation today. So we potentially are going to cover family dynamics and how to self-care while caring for a loved one, knowing and how to know your nervous system and set loving boundaries during that time of end of life, communication in these difficult moments, the role of a home funeral guide, the stages, signs, and symptoms of dying in the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. Now, that topic itself, I would say, excites me because we'll share as we go on, but it was very something I really geek out on. Holding the sacred deceased at home for days without embalming. Now, that's a big one. So I'm just going to cap it there. And Rhonda, I want to hand the mic over to you. And if you can start today, first, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here and sharing your time and energy. And I know there's a lot on the plate today with what's happening in the world. But before we go in that direction, could you take a moment and share more in depth of what you do?
Well, first of all, if I may, I would love to just open in a prayer, really on behalf of our country right now. So just very briefly, I just want to say, may all beings possess happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never be separated from the supreme happiness devoid of suffering. And may we all remain in boundless equanimity beyond attachment and aversion to those near and far.
Thank you.
It's really special to be here at a time like this where we can come together and hold each other, because very much like dying, it's an opportunity to breathe and companion one another and trust in the process. Yeah, so I just wanted to open with that.
Thank you. And thank you for the prayer, but also the words, trust in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you and I had a brief discussion before we went live, is, how what's going on in the world today and the stressors and the uncertainty and the way our system reacts is also such a mirror for what happens in our system during the time when we might be losing a loved one and they're preparing to pass over. And so I know we're going to drop into that in a moment, but some people don't understand what end of life coach does, or a death doula, or there's so many names and different roles, home funeral service, as a Tibetan Buddhist. So can you maybe shed some light to your personal background, to how you started doing what you do?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've been fascinated with death and dying since a very young age, since about 19. And I had a very precious experience with my grandmother who died, and pretty much us looking into each other's eyes. And I just was able to access a moment of presence, in a very unexpected event while my grandmother was having a stroke, and just chose to surround her in love. And I kept telling her how beautiful and lovely she was, and it had completely caught us off guard. So it was very meaningful that she died just bathed in love and light. And so that goes back about 20 years ago, and has always meant a lot to me that we can create that for for everyone deserves that. So in terms of, when my mom was passing away about 8 years ago, it became very obvious to me that we didn't get our affairs in order. And that was really what was probably the most pivotal time where I shifted into, it could be really meaningful, and it's an extraordinary act of kindness to be able to plan in advance. And having witnessed my mom go through her transition, I put together what's called a passing plan. And so that's kind of the end of life coach part of my life, is leading groups and private sessions and in planning well in advance. I'm also very fascinated with spiritual care directives. So for the practitioner, the meditator, the Buddhist, there's a lot of scripted opportunity to prepare for dying. And so I encourage, and I continue to evolve in the world of how can we write about those wishes as practitioners, as meditators, as spiritual seekers, so that we can be prepared to use our death and dying as an incredible transition opportunity, to be wide awake, to just be present to what that experience asks of us. And in writing those wishes, informing everyone who's going to care for you, because it will probably be one of your most vulnerable experiences, and it will rely heavily on those who are caring for you to kind of match you and pace you and work with you so that you can fulfill that for yourself and for others, to demonstrate that of what's possible. But I think today we talk so much maybe more about home funeral, the opportunity for home funerals. So I have been falling in love with the home funeral
So
experience.
Rhonda, so
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of track back a little bit to
Ah,
capture something that you just said,
yeah.
and then we'll move forward into that direction. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Awesome. So, you spoke about, there's a piece of listening and following the person who's transitioning, and being prepared, right, helps the caregiver to be able to surrender into that. And I know through our experience, because I will share why this is so special to me, this conversation, for those of you listening, is Rhonda was actually, I call her my angel. She was actually in my support circle last July 2020 when my mother transitioned. But speak a little bit into maybe some of the steps of how would someone prepare in advance? And this might sound so practical, but I'm saying this because I know my mom and I didn't prepare, and I depended on my inner skills
Mhm.
that I'm grateful that I had to hold space. But I remember your notebook. I remember the peacefully prepared, package, and I
Mhm.
was blown away by it. So, but I know a lot of people listening wouldn't have an idea about that. Can you just share a little bit, some practical steps of what that is for them to prepare?
Yeah. So in the classes I lead, we try to really look at a comprehensive, a very holistic set of preparations. Everything from what would happen, what would you need to know if there was an emergency. So I have a whole emergency section. We go on to medical care, and having all your medical care directives and advocates and wishes clearly articulated. Spiritual care, And that will be, of course, varies depending on your faith and your spirituality or wherever you sit. And a whole section on memorial care. And then, of course, legal care, which most people think preparing for death probably lies in the legal care, having your estate, complete and ready. But the passing plan I like to encourage is very comprehensive, and then you can be really prepared. But in many cases, people haven't taken those steps, and so we do what we can, when the experience arises.
Yeah. You mentioned something to me. I know we've had conversations about allowing the death process to be our guide. And so there's two statements I want to put out, and then I'd like to dive into a conversation on those. It's allowing the death process to guide us, like a surrender. And I remember something pivotal. You were sitting with me on my mom's back patio, and I remember I think it was day 2 or day 3 home on hospice. And I was like the one who was 100% caring for her. I didn't have any family support, but I was giving her meds, and I remember I was a bit panicked. Like I thought I was going to do something wrong. And you said to me, death isn't an emergency. Mm-hmm. And then the statement that followed was, what do you think that's going to happen? Do you think you're going to kill her? Mm-hmm. And that might sound harsh to some, but that was a wake-up call, because it was clear my mom probably only had a few more days to be in her body. And those words that you shared allowed me to surrender into following death, to allow it to be my guide. Do you have more to add to that? Could you share some wisdom on that? Anything?
Well, what I think is that we don't talk about death and dying, and so we can't relate to it gracefully if it's just coming at us, if we haven't learned, if we haven't explored, if we haven't opened ourselves. I mentioned that, maybe we would hit on the way that the 5 elements dissolve. I mean, there are enormous studies, and I would just say we're just, I'll just ping it just a little bit, but the 5 elements of the body are dissolving one by one slowly in a progressive death, of course, not in an immediate catastrophic death. But if we can learn a little bit about what happens as the elements are dissolving, and come to understand and track and follow, and I think the more we can learn about it, talk about it, share, it's just such a taboo, as your prior guests have talked about. It's such a taboo subject. If we can learn about it, I think we'll be more graceful with it. And to give you an example, when the first element of earth is dissolving, some teachers would say that the earth element is kind of, it's kind of coming alive and dissolving and coming alive and dissolving. And so you'll see people, they won't want their clothes on, or they'll want to take off their sheets, or you might even see them, touching their bodies, and their head and their arms. And it's this beautiful, you can just see how they're connecting with this earth element that's becoming, is dissolving. It's their connection with it is slowly dissolving. And so as you learn more about these progressive steps, we can recognize them, and we can tune into them. And if we're feeling comfortable, if we have some awareness of what's happening, then we can settle. And we can we can access that inner guidance more, which might be around the medication or how to care. It's when we get, triggered and we're afraid, we kind of lose access. Yeah.
Can we go in further of the stages? And I'm lighting up inside, because I remember that with holding space for my mother and watching. I hadn't read up on the stages. I didn't actually learn about the formal stages to after she transitioned, but it was very clear and obvious when she was going through the process. And the shift when I was able to go with her on the journey rather than resist it. And I remember when what I would call as the veils were thinning and she started having visions. And she started having visions of everything that represented flight. Everything had wings like butterflies and airplanes. And then, and then going into the touch. And I would watch her and her eyes were just like in awe. Like that's my interpretation. Her eyes are in awe of that physicality of her body, of maybe like knowing it was it was kind of transitioning and fading away. And it was so beautiful to witness. So would you be willing to share more about the stages for people?
Well, I mean, I can I can say again, these are beautiful topics. I encourage everybody to, like, let's learn more. Let's get together and talk about these more. So, earth is dissolving into water. Water can ebb and flow, and then we start to see, we might see mucus or moisture, and then water dissolving into fire, and the body drying up, and the temperature cooling, and and all of these stages have visions associated with them for the person that's going through them. And so earth to water to fire to air, and then ultimately to space. And it's this beautiful process of, we're so much in our physical body, and the physical body is dissolving, and then we're dropping down into our subtle body, and then as that's dissolving, and this is, I'm very biased from a Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but then, just dropping down into the central channel. And one of my favorite authors, Andrew Holacek, I consider him a mentor. I take a lot of his courses and I read his books. He talks about this beautiful experience of, imagine if you were swimming on a pool and you're at the surface of the pool and there's splashing and noise and, lots of activity. And it's like just descending, you're just slowly descending under the water, and maybe halfway down, you can still see the activity, but it's kind of far and muted. And to imagine what it would be like to just sink all the way until you're sitting at the bottom of the pool. And so everything in the world is distant and muffled. You can still see flickers of light and motion, but it's really peaceful and expansive. And so what I think to that, when I go in to see a client and I'm tuning into these dissolution stages and these three bodies, the physical, the subtle, down into the central channel. If you're thinking about that, for me it takes the edge off. It's like, oh, they're sinking, and to just hold space for this beautiful process that's happening. Because sometimes we can feel a little alarmed, that they're disturbed or suffering, or we make a lot of judgments. And so it's helpful to open to what could I mean, it's a mystery, right? It's so mysterious, but that imagery is so beautiful and so pacifying.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to share a little bit about some of the physical things I've seen that to me represent what you just shared. For me is, one, like, say having the visions, watching the touching of the body and awe of the body. But as a breathwork trainer, watching the breath go through various stages from, I heard you say like taking the clothes off on, not wanting to keep clothes on, from the breath, from being in a more manic, frantic state, like agitated state, very restless in bed, to all of a sudden there's a calm, and then there's like spaciousness between the inhale and the exhale. So that would be, to me, like it's starting a sinking, like it's starting to settle. And for me, what was the biggest gift was to just be present to my mother's process, but to have the ability to track my own stress and to know when I was starting to put my agenda or stressors on my mother's experience. And I share that to those listening because for me, there was a lot of skills internally of tracking that so I could take the space. So if I needed to go out of the room and cry or take a couple of deep breaths and know when I needed to work on my stuff and where I could make it all about my mother, that if it was my agenda, it needed to change. And I think that was a big awareness that I had. And I want to shift into home funeral because one of the things on these notes that you brought into my life, Rhonda, I was going to I think it was the third day of barely any sleep. I had brought my mother home on hospice. I wasn't sleeping because my mom would have panics in the middle of the night and wanting me near, not really sure of her environment. And so I was up, and it was going on to day 3 that I was in tears. I was alone. And hospice, I mean, shout out to hospice, but I'm going to say it was my first time, and I thought they'd be there with me 24/7, and they weren't. So I pretty much felt alone. And someone recommended me to you through social media, and you immediately showed up saying, I am here for you 24 hours a day. I got your back. Like, I'm part of your support circle. And I know you and I talked about structure so we can surrender. And so this is going to take us into the home funerals because I know that's what you educated me on and prepared me for. But can you talk a little bit about, I'm just going to say, and then have you take it over, is the importance of having a support group. And I'm going to say to people listening, if you think you don't, because I didn't think I did, my angels suddenly showed up. And one of them was Rhonda. So that was important to allow me to surrender, to be more intimate with my mother. So can you share more about the importance of that? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge you of what an offering it was for you. I mean, if you think about someone's dying, it's such a profound time, and to hear you say you wanted to be there 100% for your mom. I mean, that's just I can't imagine a more precious offering, so and I saw that and was present to that, and I thank you for showing me again how beautiful that is. With these in-home funerals, it's interesting because all my clients recently are like amazing people, right? Like they're Taoist life coaches and they're intimacy coaches. And my most recent client is a midwife of 20. Like these are they're empowered, people that want to create something so sacred, like they have a vision. And sometimes I think, they've got it, but I think there's something powerful about coming in and just putting your hand on someone's back, and just saying, I've got you, I'm here, like to, death. And you've heard me say this before. I think death gathers angels. I think that it's just so beautiful how people will come and we need that, right? Like it's so beautiful to be gathered together and be able to rest on each other and lean on each other. And, in caring while someone's dying, there are vigil circles available. If your loved one is at home and you've been up, and I could see that you were up for many nights and that you needed to sleep. That is a perfect example of bringing in vigil support. I know we have people right here in San Diego and people in your area too that will come and take shifts throughout the night. So that's a term that people will use, a vigil circle. And we know that if you have, I'm a believer that once you've done an in-home funeral, you can do them again and again and again. The first one is always the hardest. And I have an incredible mentor here in San Diego, Eric Putt of Thresholds. And he has, from the very beginning, said to me, the best in-home funeral is funeral that you do very little. You're almost transparent, because the point is for the family to create their vision, to express what honors their loved one, and just hold space. Give people the permission, affirm, our legal rights. Maybe come in and take care of some of the little things that people aren't quite sure about. And by doing that, gives you the ability to just design what you want to do. So a home funeral guide, I'm going to say, is somebody who's done it before, and can come in and just hold you, so that you have access to everything that you'd like to see and do for your loved one. Yeah.
Home funeral. I want to go more into the home funeral and the possibilities for people, because you taught me, you educated me, or the whole group, you, Eric Putz, Lori, we had a group of angels, but you educated me, one, on my rights with my mother's body. And so I was educated that I didn't one, again, emergency is not a death. I didn't have to call the ambulance right away and have someone come and take my mom's body. I had the rights to keep my mom's body in my home, to prepare her body, to bathe her, to clothe her, and to do ritual and ceremony, and have the viewing or the gathering or celebration of life right there. So she was dressed in her favorite party dress and in her bedroom with her dog. And can you talk more about that for people to know what is possible?
Yeah, it is. It is. We have every right. It's a right in many states. I can say it's right in San Diego. I always tell people, check your state, because I think there are a few states that have some limitations. But we do have the right to care for our loved one at home. And, with just a little bit of guidance, we can keep them, and it's beautiful. And it offers a number of opportunities for ceremony, like you just outlined. It offers, being present. Your loved one can die may die at home. Your loved one may die at the hospital. Even if your loved one dies at the hospital, you can bring them home and have the home funeral. I can say very briefly that my father died 2 years ago in the hospital, and we were able to bring him home and create the most beautiful 3-day, what we called an Irish wake, in our home for him. So whether it's at home, whether it's the hospital, whether it's at a assisted care, you can bring your loved one home, and you can attend to them with your own hands, with your own heart. And you can dress them and lay them in grace. And if done properly, they can lay in grace, either in their bed or on a massage table or in the living room. You can make a parlor. And in my personal experience, they remain so luminous and beautiful for 3 days. My most recent client was even longer. So it's a beautiful, beautiful experience. The family can come and go. If they're at home, there's a sense of sitting with them, praying with them, maybe going off and doing something else, coming back later, coming in the morning. It's just such an opportunity to come and go, and it brings the head and the heart, by being able to go in and out, coming and going, laying them in grace, and then following it maybe with a shrouding ceremony, which is another opportunity to, it's so beautiful to kind of prepare your loved one for that transition, whether it's going to be onto burial or cremation, to wrap, and you're tucking and you're folding and you're just wrapping your loved one in this beautiful shroud that you can use your own material, your own ribbon, your own, people use all kinds of things to wrap and prepare. It's another opportunity for anointing and blessing and prayer. So the whole experience is just rich with being engaged, being engaged with your loved one at their most vulnerable. I mean, they have given over their body and you are in care of their body, and that honorific caring of their body, I feel like it drenches you in blessings for days, months, and years. Like when you think back and your memories are that you were that engaged, it's very healing. It's very blessing.
Yeah. One of the things that comes to my mind is how that process is very beneficial for the grief process.
Mhm,
That often gets overlooked
mhm,
because the instantaneous need to take care of logistics or the finances or organize the family. And I've witnessed so many people when their loved ones die and they get right into that organization mode because they have to.
mhm,
And so I know for me, it was so healing to have that spaciousness. And I want to say, not even just to have it, but I firmly like committed, meaning that nothing, I set a boundary, and soon I want to go into boundaries and family
mhm,
dynamics because it's going to always be different. But um, I was just like, this is what my mother deserves.
mhm,
This is what I deserve to go through the grief process and honor her like this.
mhm,
And I will say, I had her home for 3 days. I still went in every day to say good morning and good night. I'd go in and have conversations with her.
mhm,
And I did go through the whole process of going to her cremation and doing prayer and being with her because for my system, that felt like completion.
mhm,
That felt like seeing her all the way through to going back to the earth.
mhm,
And so yeah, would you agree? Like it helps with the
mhm.
grief cycle for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about so many people where, I mean, we've heard this before, right? That the institution of the funeral businesses will come in and we'll take care of the details, right? So that you don't have to. But that just, there's such opportunity there to be engaged. Like, why would you want to, like, you're going to just go home and you just sit on your hands? I mean, there's no opportunity for, yeah, and it's just the best way to describe it is to stay present, to stay engaged, to again go in and out, to let the head and heart come together. It's just really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And thank you for being such a guide, right, in that process for sure. Um, let's talk a little bit. We'll just kind of go back and forth here. I know I'm very passionate about this topic with family dynamics and boundary setting in such a difficult time. One of the things, again, I'll keep going back to is I'm so grateful because I've dedicated my life to developing these skills around communication and interrelating and so I had that in my corner when it came to setting boundaries, but that doesn't mean it wasn't challenging and tough.
Mhm,
But what the toughest experience for me during the process, well, I'll start with the easiest. The easiest was I was the only family member.
mhm,
Right? So there was difficulty there because I wanted the emotions, I wanted my family close. However, I don't know, this might sound awkward, but it was also it felt really beneficial because I knew how I wanted to honor my mom, and my
mhm,
family just let me do that
mhm,
because I will share all this ritual and ceremony and rites of passage and shrouding and doing home funeral is completely backwards for my family.
mhm,
And so some of the communication and mindset that helped me was to have the ability to compassionately accept their way,
mhm,
even in the midst of they didn't agree with what I was doing, or they were just nervous.
Mhm.
So if we could unpack, like, okay, what might our family members be actually feeling and needing during a disagreement?
Mhm.
And for me, that's a process of being able to access more compassion. And so when I and the people I work with are able to access that level of compassion, we don't have to agree, right? It
Mhm.
just changes the dynamic of the conversation. So
Mhm.
that was the easy piece for me. The tough part was after my mother had passed, I realized my boundaries were stronger.
Hmm.
I was a no to a lot of things. I was a no to, don't talk to me about the money, don't talk to me about logistics, don't talk to me about what's next.
Mhm.
At the moment, and I know people who are experiencing family members transitioning, this is the automatic. And people might not feel like they can say no.
Mhm.
And I'm here to just encourage people. There is a way to compassionately say no,
Mhm.
and tools and practices to be like, okay, so what is everybody feeling and needing? And how can we have a conversation and still disagree, but just kind of have the delivery of it just be a bit softer and more understanding?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, is there anything you want to add to that? Like, what's your experience with that and the family dynamics?
I think that's what really speaks to why it's so important to educate and get familiar with everything that's possible. Because I think the person that's the most certain about what they want kind of wins. Like, I mean, in terms of like what direction you want to go and how you want to hold a space.
Mhm.
Because there's so much. I mean, usually death catches us by surprise, and we're heartbroken, and we're grieving, and we have enormous amount of stress. Um, I mean, when you talk about compassion, it's like these are the most difficult times we'll experience, and so it's not a good time to be, like wondering what we should do, or trying to come up with a plan. I mean, we often do, right? And we can do it to the best of our ability, but it just kind of speaks to why it's so beautiful to plan in advance and have some thoughts and ideas and wishes and a vision for the ending of our life so that there can be some amount of certainty. There can be some amount of you know, to be honest with you, I had attempted to work on the passing plan for my father, and he was fighting pancreatic cancer. And it's very difficult to work on your affairs, to complete a passing plan when you're fighting. When you're fighting for your life, when you want to have a cure, right? It's a really difficult time. And I had approached my dad a few times and said, "Let's talk about some things." And it was, it was difficult, but he said he gave me just a couple things, and they were just chicken scratches in his passing plan. He said, "I want an Irish wake." And we wrote that down. It was just a real brief writing in his passing plan. And so when he died, which was unexpected for us, he died before his terminal diagnosis would have, it was in advance of what we expected. So we were caught off guard, and that wish drove his entire home funeral. Um, and so again, so important to talk about this in advance, to write some things down in advance, to talk to your best friend, your parent, your child, and just outline a vision. And of course, you can go deeper and deeper and deeper and get very, very detailed. But even just pointing the way gives family certainty, and what to do. Yeah.
Mm. And how perfect that one point about the Irish funeral, like that
Mhm.
was the directive that
Mhm.
organized everything. How perfect when I come back to thinking you said surrender to the death process, and
Mhm.
like an angel coming down with that message.
Mhm.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would like to add to this conversation at this stage? That
I just encourage I encourage us all to have conversation. People will say it's morbid, right? We hear this all the time. It's morbid to talk about end of life. It's been the opposite experience for me. The more I think about the end of life, the more I don't take it for granted. The more I wake up, the more I realize this life is precious. The more I seize the day and begin living in a way where I won't have any regret. So I think it's really powerful to think about end of life. And as we think about end of life, sometimes, I mean, the way I just described it, it informs how we live today. I mean, I wrote out my spiritual care directive of all the things that I would wish to have happen if I was dying. And then you begin to realize, well, what happens, one of my authors will say, what happens now happens then. So if that's what you want to happen then, that's what needs to happen now. And so you begin to merge whatever you want to happen then, we better have happen now. And so we wake up, all those spiritual practices and prayers that you think would be so special at the end of life. It's pretty, it's obvious that spending time marinating, being in those practices right now will make them very familiar, will hold us in a very sacred way when we get to the then, right?
Yes, I love that. Yeah, so have these conversations, which is why Rhonda and I are here today.
Yeah.
I know for me, it was very potent to ask questions. Another, and little questions, just like, oh, I remember one day sitting on my mother's patio. Oh, like, what do you want to do with your body? Like but it was just like we were out having tea and just it popped in. So it didn't have to be this in-depth conversation, but they were little questions that were sprinkled in to our conversations. And the other thing that I want to add, a pre-prep, if people do have a knowing, like if a family member is experiencing cancer, or I know my mom, what instigated things like this for me was my mom had a stroke a few years ago. But what did I do one day? I actually grabbed all her photo albums. This was on Mother's Day 2020. We had no clue she was going to transition, a few months later. But I just had my gut just felt, and I went in and took out all her photo albums. Now, these are albums from when she was a baby growing up. And I took them out and I pulled out one photo one by one. And we spent the whole day going through her entire life story of photos and her telling me stories about what the photos were, because it was a way for me to casually bring her through her own process without her kind of knowing, of remembering her life and remembering how valuable she was and how important she was to life. And because it wasn't necessarily my mom's normal thing to do, I didn't announce that we were doing something formal. It was just like, oh, let's do this and let her system realize how invaluable she was as a human on this planet. It would make me cry. But
yes.
yeah, so pre-processes and asking questions, I'm hearing you say, having conversations about this. There was something else I wanted to add, and it keeps leaving me, and it may not be important. So we're going to prepare to close our conversation today. And I just want to, again, thank you, not just for coming here live, but thank you for being a part of my mom's and my journey, being with me and the process, and educating me, as well as who isn't here, with Lori and Eric Putz. And for those of you listening, thresholds.com, I believe it is, or do you know?
Thresholds Home Family Home Funeral Services here in San Diego.
And I know I just Googled it and I found them. And then Rhonda, where can people find you? I'm going to type your information in the comments here.
Sure. I'm at peacefullyprepared.com, or you can email me at rhonda@peacefullyprepared.com.
Okay.
And I live in this space. I have no I'm just honored and privileged to be with people. And I invite anyone, if you have questions about anything we've shared today, please reach out. I'm happy to do private sessions, discovery calls. I'll be launching a 5-week passing plan class in February. So if you find me on Facebook, I'm Peacefully Prepared on Facebook. Would love to
Yeah.
have you join.
They could find information about your course at Peacefully Prepared. I want to make
On
sure they have
Facebook.
that.
Yeah.
Great. Great. And I just want to, we have some listeners, so I'm so enthralled in our conversation. I just want us to acknowledge we had Ruby, Ruby Roof.
Oh, hi, Ruby.
We had Jill Van, I can't see without my glasses. Jill Van Bodegom.
Yeah.
Yes, she says, so good. Thank you both for this treasured wisdom. And then we had Colleen Monahan who said, thank you so much, ladies. Amazing, heartfelt information. Yeah. And so I want to add, because for those of you listening now and who will listen to the rerun of this, because it will be replayed, all of Rhonda's information, her courses, anything she might share with me, even once we get off this call, I will have all her links in every way that you can contact her, even for her course that's coming up. Colleen's waving to us. Hello, Colleen. Yeah. And so, and I also want to share that for those of you who are interested in more of these weekly lives, this particular live, we're actually live on 5 different places right now. However, typically I only go live in a private Facebook group called Intimacy Hub, which is where I do my live weekly trainings. And if you're looking to gain more of these skills and confidence around communication, being able to set loving boundaries with your family members, with your partners, I have a 10-week course that's coming up, and you can find that information at redefining-intimacy.com. I'll put that in the comments. Any final words? I know I keep asking you, but we just keep going. Anything come to you before we close today?
I just stay open, stay curious, talk about end of life. And I want to thank you, Support. Thank you for having me on. And it was such a privilege to be with your mom. And it gifted me so deeply to watch you and your intimacy. And you created extraordinary moments in offering. Your mom was drenched in blessings as she took flight, and from your loving care. So it was beautiful to witness, and thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. And everyone deserves that, right?
Yeah.
And just my wish is that all beings are surrounded, that they know that they are loved when they transition, that they're surrounded with peace and grace. And yeah. And thank you for everything you do. Yeah. And thank you for you who have tuned in and viewed us here. And again, I will share Rhonda's links and information as we continue to share this video in the coming days. Be well.